for those in the military when they were deployed, and particularly those who were sent to combat zones. The anxiety and the stress. I'm sure it's hard for a spouse to kiss a law officer goodbye every morning, wondering if they're going to come back alive. And that's tough. And I suppose the relief of anxiety of saying goodbye is when you know when they'll return, or when they do return. I would say nearly half of my career with the government was working away from home. But the majority of the time, I knew that I would be coming home most weekends or every other weekends and things like that. I was never shot at, so all my work was in Texas. But Texas is a big state, and so there was a few places where I worked that were just too far to go home for the weekend. I'll never forget. I was working out at Dale City. And that's, you've always heard that you had to be going there to get there. Well, that was literally Dale City, Texas. You had to be going there to get there. 90 miles from El Paso, 90 from Carlsbad, and 90 from Van Horn. And so I had a long weekend. And I was going to meet Llewellyn and the kids with some friends in Sanderson. That's back when the speed limit was 55. Well, I got stopped there, pulled over there at Marathon, and he asked, usually they'll ask you, do you have any reason to be speeding? I said, well, I don't know if this is a reason, but I'm going to meet with my wife and family. I said, I hadn't seen them in 2 months. He just kind of chuckled. He said, well, slow down when you get down to mile mark or something, and he'll get you. Yeah. So, and like I said, we have, and like I said, I guess that was the toughest part, and I can't imagine, being deployed for months or years or something. But that was usually the longest stay I had was about 2 months, where I couldn't. It was just too far to go home for a weekend. And you look with anticipation. Seems like every day gets slower and slower as you come closer to that time that you'll be going home. But like I said, I was able to come home most of the time, and like I said, time just seemed to drag on when you near the day that you return. And then sometimes I was on a job, and just a few days before I was scheduled to come home, I get a call. Well, I need you to stay a little longer. And what do? I always said, I always got two choices. I can stay or quit. And I like to eat, so so I stayed. But as believers, we should have confidence as we anticipate Jesus' return. He didn't tell us when, but he promised that he would. And that's enough. On the day before his crucifixion, he again told his disciples that he would be killed. Yet as they gathered for the Passover, the 12 argued over who would be the greatest. In Luke 22:24. I've thought about that and read it before. Jesus was about to leave them. They'd been with him for 3 years, and here they are arguing who's going to be the greatest. Isn't that kind of typical? It reminds me of little children who want to be the first or best liked. They like you better. They like me better than they like you, and I always wanted to be, the teacher's pet, so to speak. But I don't know. I was thinking about. I don't know. Of course, my age yourselves remember the comic group, the Smothers Brothers. They had an album coming out and said, my brother was an only child. And when I was going to school at Tarleton, they performed there, and I remember one of them. Said, of course, you were mother's favorite, and they said no, one. He said, yeah, you got a dog, and I didn't get one. She said, well, you got a chicken. But I think sometimes even as siblings, there's some competition of who's the favorite, or you like them better than you like me, and of course it's all just mind. We were all loved the same, but yeah, I've thought that one before. Well, I thought one time my brother and I were twins because mother made all of our shirts and we were all alike. So I thought, well, we were twins. But yeah, I thought, well, I'm the third child. Why would they want me? They had a boy and a girl, and when my adopted or. But there's always something that goes through a child's mind, and even some of them, even in adulthood, it goes through them too. that they think, well, they're not liked as well, and this and that. But during the Passover, Jesus used a powerful object lesson to teach them humility. After traveling the dusty streets and roads, hosts usually offered water so guests could wash their feet. Now, sometimes the servants performed their task, but in the upper room, no one volunteered. Remember our lesson? Come in. Our lesson here a while back, where the lady washed Jesus' feet and wiped it with her hair. And what did Jesus say? The one of the owner of the house, you didn't even offer me water to wash my feet. And that was a custom, really. When you come in, you were offered water. Well, here's this guy criticizing this woman for being there, but yet Jesus says, you didn't even offer me water to wash my feet. But in the upper room, Jesus, there was no room volunteered. No one volunteered to wash the feet. I can just read, hear what they're thinking. They probably didn't audibly say it, but probably thinking, I'm not going to wash any feet. That's the job of a servant. And but hard, and I was thinking, some of you, I don't know if you've ever known or remember of the what we used to call the hard shell Baptists or primitive Baptists. They practice washing feet. I'm glad we weren't. I'm glad we're not primitive Baptists here. Now, even some churches, as a sign of servanthood and everything, they will, they wash feet. It's not an every Sunday practice or anything like that. What? No, it's not an ordinance, exactly. I think with the primitive Baptists, and there used to be one when you go to, gosh, I can't even think, Topsy. You go and there's still a primitive Baptist church there. Yeah, it is an ordinance to their church. Yes. But men wash the men's feet and women wash the women's feet. Yeah, they make that clear. Don't want any hanky-panky going on. Huh? But it's some of that. I was kind of reading up on some of it. Of course, some of them, they don't believe in the security of the believer either. They practice, not totally said, but Calvinism, but are strictly against Armenians. That's what free will. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's extreme. Well, in fact, what's that church there? Was it Missouri or Kansas? Oh, I'm gonna say Woodway. Yeah, Westboro. See, they're primitive Baptists, and yeah, I wish they'd take Baptists. A lot of churches take Baptists off. I've said I wish they'd take theirs off. Yeah, Topeka, Kansas. Yeah, Westboro. Yeah, they're ultra extreme. But after spending 3 years with Jesus, there was still so much for them to learn. Well, really, you look at us. How much I've been a Christian, since I was nearly 9 years old. There's still a lot for me to learn. It's a lot for all of us to learn. Uh, no one should think, well, I've arrived. There's nothing else I can learn to be taught. I've told before when I'd been working for government, about 15, 16 years, and I boasted, well, there hadn't been anything come along on inspection on a job that I hadn't already had to deal with. Well, boy, God got my attention on the next job. I think it's kind of like God said, well, I'll show you. I mean, it was the worst job I've ever worked on. And it was just nearly an argument of nose to nose with the contractor nearly every day. And that's not good. And it's not. But knowing his hour was at hand, Jesus knelt down and washed the disciples' feet. Peter at first resisted. You can hear Peter, not me. I need to be washing your feet. But then yielded when Jesus said it was necessary. Jesus then urged the rest of the disciples to follow his example. After Judas leaving the meal to betray Jesus, he prepared the remaining disciples for his death. He commanded them to love one another as he loved them. We looked at, boy, that's a pretty tall order, isn't it? And it's not really an order. It's, well, a command for us to love others, and as Jesus loved us. So let's look now at our lesson text. Someone read John 13:31 through 35. Okay. You know, the Amplified Bible reads, when Judas had gone out. And it says when he had gone, and some others translate say when Judas had gone out. I've often wondered if Jesus thought the accuser would just rough up Jesus a little bit and demand that he denounce his ministry, and that would be it. I really wonder sometimes, did he really think that they were going to crucify him, put him to death? We don't know what was going through Jesus' mind. Sometimes, like I said, I wonder, well, they're going to beat him up a little bit and work him over, and that'll be it. But we don't know. But Jesus viewed his approaching crucifixion as the ultimate fulfillment of his mission of salvation. Son of Man was the most common title for himself. It was not referred to any other in the Bible. The title was used 81 times in the Gospels, and Jesus used it to emphasize his humanity. What was about to happen glorified him by accomplishing his messianic purpose. Not only was Jesus honored, but the Father would be glorified in him. And I think I've skipped some scripture. Doesn't it go on? Yeah, I skipped it, but we'll get there. The rest of that chapter. But anyway, let me back up here a little bit. Okay, through the obedience, even to the point of death on the cross, the Son glorified the Father in Philippians 2:8. John did not imply doubt by using the word if in verse 32, God's glorification. In Greek, the word conveys the idea of since. In other words, since God is glorified in him. In other words, it's not if, and you know, that's been brought up before, and it's not a question, and it's more like said transfer as since you believe, or if you know, we've heard it in the scripture before, the words if, well, that's not putting a question, whether you doubt or whether you really are or not. It's, and I don't really know how to put it in a form, but it's more like said, more translated closer to the meaning of sense, and that it didn't apply if but the word, like I said, means since God is glorified him, the Father shall also glorify Christ. The phrase straightway in the King James Version, or immediately in New American, encompassed all that would take place over the next few days. Despite the shame on the cross, Jesus would endure humiliation, pain, and death because of the ultimate joy set before him. Jesus then referred to his disciples as little children. He was not being arrogant, but was speaking with affection. As Jesus' departure grew closer, his love for those men was apparent. Jesus wanted the disciples to know he would only be with them a little while longer. You know, that's, to me, you put yourself in their place, that really is hard to grasp. You know, here he came as a savior. You know, and maybe it's still in the back of their mind, they're looking as a leader against the oppression. But he was not just talking about his death here, though, which would occur in less than 24 hours. Jesus knew that he would appear to them again 3 days after his resurrection, but after 40 days, he would ascend to the Father. As Jesus had said to the Jews, he now informed his followers that they would seek him, but where I am going, you cannot come. In John 7:34 and 8:21, Jesus rebuked the Jewish leaders in reference to their seeking him, but being unable to find him. He was repeating what he had previously said, but with a different emphasis. Based on their faith in him, they would join him one day. They could not come to the cross and bear the sins of the world as he would. But unlike the Jews Jesus was speaking to earlier, they would again join him one day. Preparing them for his departure, Jesus gave the disciples a new commandment. This commandment fulfilled every previous command to love one another. And I think I jumped some scriptures here, but I've got it all. Let me go ahead and stop right here and let me read the rest of that chapter. So Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Peter said to him, Lord, why can't I follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you. Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. I don't know to be watching them NCAA basketball games while I'm preparing to have the television on. I got it all. I just didn't get that reference down. So, yeah, I used to, back in the fall, I blame it on the football being on while I'm typing my lesson up. That's funny. I never watched basketball until they get into the NCAA finals. But I don't know why I show any interest in it then, but I do. But this commandment fulfilled every previous command, like I said, to love one another, is emphasized in Matthew 22:39. Love your neighbor. But Jesus adds more. They were to love each other even as I have loved you. That's a pretty tall order, isn't it? It is. Jesus' love is unconditional and sacrificial. There is a standard for how we love one another. This is a standard. It's not if or try to. This is not a choice. And, that's, like I said, sometimes hard as Christians and human. It's kind of hard to deal with, maybe. It's not optional. And, that puts a lot on us and on me to love as Jesus loved us. In a way, our Christian love, and I think it's a badge of honor, a badge where we wear displaying and radiating our love to one another. You ought to see it. People should be able to see it on our face. And that we love. And sometimes, I never forget, of course, not as much as we used to go to gospel singers. We love gospel singers and quartets. And one of them was introduced in the group, and he got to this one that was in the group, and he said, we had to learn to love him. And but I think sometimes there's a lot of truth to that. There's something that we have to learn to love. Besides their faults and ours. But unfortunately, some Christians are get even Christians. If you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And where's the love there? And it's not there. And I will, and I've even heard this, even maybe some of my distant family. Words that may not come right out and said them exact words, but what they mean, I'll forgive you only with conditions attached. And I'll forgive you if you do this and if you do that. Or I won't forgive you until you do this or do that. What if Jesus had put conditions on us when he died on the cross? We're in bad shape if he did. In verse 36, there are times we may say things or make boasts that are unrealistic and are told, you can't do that, or you don't realize what you're saying. I think we've all been guilty of that. I know I have. We've made boasts or said something about something in a parent or a teacher or whatever, a friend said, you can't do that. What are you doing? What do you think you're saying? But Jesus spoke about his imminent departure. Peter interrupted. Where are you going? I think we all have a little bit of Simon Peter in us. I think that, especially that maybe it was me, that stubborn part, or that hard-headed part. But he was respectful, addressing Jesus as Lord, but still voices his worry. Naturally, Peter wanted an explanation. And I don't really think Peter was wrong in asking. But, you get to thinking after 3 years, by now they should know. This is not the first time Jesus told them this. But his confession about Jesus' departure overshadowed Jesus' commandment to love others. Jesus didn't rebuke Peter. Instead, he answered patiently, explaining that Peter could not follow him just yet. I like to see that part, just yet. He cannot follow him just yet. Not now. Jesus was going to the cross to atone for human sin. Neither Peter or the other disciples could join this act. In fact, John, as far as we know, was the only disciple that was present at the crucifixion. Jesus added, "But you will follow me." Ultimately, Peter would glorify God in his death. Now, but Jesus said, "But you will follow me." Ultimately, Peter would glorify him in his death, but Peter was crucified. And this is what, I don't know if he was crucified upside down. And all the disciples, with the exception of John, died martyred deaths. And but I think there's a reason. Peter said he didn't. I forget how it is. But man, he requested, I think, to be. Yeah. 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 Right. Yes. So Peter's question did not seek information, but was driven by an increasing emotion. Fear and frustration filled his heart. He couldn't imagine life without Jesus. In the heat of the moment, Peter promised to lay down his life for Jesus. But while Peter undoubtedly meant what he said, he was stressing his loyalty to Jesus more than his desire for martyrdom. I just thinking, too, especially that first love when we were kids, and the girl or boy breaks up with you, it's just devastating, isn't it? It just nearly kills us. We go around moping and just think life is over, and and uh, and probably kind of, maybe that's not a good example, to kind of put Peter in that same place. It was kind of devastating to him, but Jesus was going to be gone and not be there, and he's probably thinking there, he's gone forever. And Jesus assuring him that you will follow me, I will be back. But he might have meant, and then he goes on, Peter says, I will die alongside you. Or he probably didn't mean I will die for you. He probably was saying, I'll die alongside you. We remember, fast forward to the Garden of Gethsemane when he cut the servant's ear off. Of course, he was ready to fight. But Jesus told him, put up your sword. But he was ready then. But Jesus' response was more likely a response of sadness. Will you lay down your life for me? Really? It's like, do you really know what you're saying? It goes back to that boasting. Well, you don't know what you're saying, what you mean, and what you're talking about. Because you said you're willing to do this or that, but do you really mean that? Because the time may come when you're called on to do that. People in the military, they went to, like I said, they were in the war zones. When you left, you took an oath to defend this nation, but there's times when you get into a situation, well, God, I didn't really mean this, and but you were willing, and like I said, sometimes we don't know what we got into. Um, I'm not going to go into details, but I've been shot at before, and is this it? This not really what I intended, God. and but it is. It's when you get right down what's called the nitty gritty. Are you really willing to do that? Oh yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. This is not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is not this glory and stuff and they show in the movies. Yeah, it's real life, and it is. It, what? Sure. Right. Sure. And what does really, Jesus loved us so much he was willing to give his life for us. That was unconditional love. And that's we're to have that same unconditional love. Now, does that mean we go out and say, well, just uh, I'm gonna die for so and so, or I'm gonna pick somebody to die for? No, no, but it means that we go to the point that we it's in other words it's unconditional. We give it all, our all. Yeah, yeah. But so many times, even we as Christians, we make these statements or do it, and then we get to a point where we say, well, I didn't mean that. Yeah, yeah, that. Yeah, I didn't. That's no. I don't want to do that. that's that's asking too much. But it is, and it is something we have to really. I think a lot of prayer about and dwell on it. Are we really able to give unconditional love? People that have been maybe hateful to us, or someone that's hurt our family or something. I mean, it's tough. I can remember in here a few years ago that police officer lady that shot this man. She went in the wrong apartment and thought it was her, and she shot him and killed him. And of course she was on trial. And after the sentence was out, his brother come up and told him he forgave her. That's tough. That's tough. That's to me is unconditional love, and that he would be willing to. My first thought would have been, he's coming here. What's he going to do? Yeah, you know, try to break my neck or what? But it is, like I said, I thought, I've even asked myself, could I do that? Could I do that? But that, like I said, when right after the trial, the sentence was set, and he comes to her and hugs her and says, I forgive you. That's tough. That's tough. And that's happened before in other instances where a family member was killed or a loved one or something, and they said, we forgive you. We forgive. And I know that they're in prison. And I can't remember Hattie had her when she worked at the prison. She killed her children, uh, and used to drown them in the bathtub, I think. And Hattie said, "I truly believe she's accepted Christ, and so she had been forgiven and unconditional." And like I said, there are situations where it can be tough. It can be tough. I remember reading an instance when back in the Iraqi war and everything that uh, this Christian group were confronted by, I think, Osama bin Laden's army, and they told him, and I think they were Islamic people, but they were told, said, you denounce your Christianity or we'll kill your children. And he said he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He said, if you take their lives, they'll be in heaven with God, with Jesus, and they killed them. I mean, how, that's tough. It would have been just a lot easier to cross your fingers behind your back and say, I denounce Christianity. And but they didn't. And pray to God we'll never be confronted with a situation like that. That we're asked to do that. That's in a way, some people have a hard time with that. That's love for your children. It was love for them because they knew they would be safe in the arms of Jesus. And it's hard to fathom and understand sometimes. And so somebody read now John 14, 1 through 6. We'll get right back on the right page now. Amen. Good old Thomas. And then old Thomas. I think we all have some of his characteristics. I mean, Jesus always knows our hearts and minds. That's kind of scary sometimes. Think about it. He knows our hearts and minds. He understood the turmoil the disciples were experiencing. Although he had often spoke of his approaching death, they had not processed the reality that he would no longer be with them. Peter's question expressed their grief and confusion. Even the compassionate Christ, Jesus encouraged them. They could refuse to live with troubled hearts. Jesus understood the disciples were upset on a deeply spiritual and emotional level. His answer to their fear was faith. Hadn't changed today. If they could believe in God, they should also believe also in Him. Using language his disciples could comprehend, Jesus referred to his Father's house. While heaven and earth cannot contain God, his vast dwelling place has a place for all who believe in his Son. The word rendered mansion in the King James Version translates as rooms in other translations in New American Standard as dwelling place. Well, it's going to be beyond imagination, whatever it is. Whatever it is, it's going to work. It's beyond our imagination. With a simple statement, Jesus connected going away with to prepare a place for his followers. After leaving, we will one day join him at the place he has prepared. But of course, his leaving would not be the end of the story. He would come again. His promise he made to them, he will come again. And that's his promise to us, isn't it? That he'll come again. So their separation was not permanent. You know, I talked about earlier, when we were separated from our spouse, our family, it was not permanent. By his resurrection, Jesus made it possible to receive them to himself, guaranteeing his presence and ensuring that their salvation was healed. You know, when I was preparing this, I was thinking about sometimes our separation may be permanent here on earth. But I know we had, and Chris and maybe JC remember the Charlie, what was it, Leonard. You know, he was in the military and he was sent to Iraq. What? Yeah. And it gets kind of emotional, but I remember standing back there and I hugged him. I said, "You come back. You be sure and come back." And he said, "You say that like I'm not coming back." And he didn't. He was killed over there. But we'll meet him again. Yes, I mean, he's coming back. We'll be coming to meet him. And like I said, it really hit home when you had someone in your church that you were close to that lost their life. But although Jesus understood their confusion about where he was going, he indicated they knew the way. After several years with Jesus, the disciples should have understood the spiritual implications of what he was sharing. Thomas spoke up, addressing Jesus as Lord, confessing that he did not know the way or how to get there. How do I get there? In other words, maybe another word. That may be, that may be maybe a child or an immature was speaking about heaven and going, and maybe that may be a question. How do I get there? Yeah, how do I get there? Although Jesus had told them he was going to the Father, they remained clueless. And sometimes I think maybe we may be a little hard on them. Like I said, they'd been with them for 3 years, and Jesus had told them this and explained it to them, and then they still didn't understand. Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, they were thinking about who's going to be the greatest. And like I said, kind of like kids. But since they didn't know where Jesus was going, they couldn't know the way. In spite of what some people today believe and preach, Jesus is the only way. There's no other way. Jesus noted that he is the truth. I've told this story before, but a young preacher asked an old seasoned pastor what he should preach. The old preacher replied, "Preach Jesus and the truth, nothing else." And that's so true. Now, we might add Jesus is the light, his life and the light, but basically, preach Jesus and the truth. And that's all with not just preacher, that's with all of us. Proclaim Jesus and the truth. That's all. That's it. That's as simple as that. This does not merely mean said, He is not merely the way to life, Jesus is the life. That does not merely mean physical life, but to have Christ is life. Believers honor Christ by believing in Him as they wait for His return. It doesn't mean to sit around waiting for His return, but to be about the Father's business in anticipation to His return. Like I said, that don't mean just get you in a little room and sit there and say, well, I'm waiting. We had some good friends. She said her brother got the wild idea one time that God was going to take care of him. He didn't have to do anything. Well, it doesn't work that way. No. We're not to sit around. We're to be about His business. We're about His business. Being here, worshiping together, proclaiming the Word. And I was watching, I think last night, Charles Stanley. And he was speaking on the Holy Spirit. And to be used by the Holy Spirit, we have to completely, totally give ourselves over to Him, to the Lord, to be used by the Spirit. And sometimes I've always thought this story. Someone said, picture your heart as a house, and this renter is renting. You're renting that house, and they take you through there and show you everything. Everything's yours. You can do what you want to with it, except you can't go in that room. That's reserved. And that's kind of the way sometimes we are with our heart. We give God our heart except for one little portion of it. And we want to keep that. But it's totally, totally committed to God, to live for Him. We got a few minutes. Any comments? Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 And I know, and I'm not nitpicking, but this song was popular in the movie. I can only imagine. I can't even imagine. How can we imagine? Not in our minds. We especially as kids, when growing up, we got this wild imagination, and but there's no way we can imagine what it's going to be like. We just need to be working toward that, and excited about it, looking forward to it, to Christ's return, and to taking Him with us. And any other comments? Okay, JC, would you dismiss us, please?